Well, welcome to the STEM Salon on Engineering Emergency. I have a feeling that I have a very devoted audience, and the last thing I'm going to have to convince you of is why engineering is important. Am I right about that?
Yes.
My name is Linda Rosen. I am the CEO of Change the Equation, and I'm going to several times point to the slide to call out all of our many co-hosts. We're deeply appreciative for all the work that they do, which is the most important thing, but also for their support in this event today. So National Engineers Week, which everyone's well aware of, offers a wonderful opportunity to raise awareness about the rewards of engineering careers and their importance to our nation's prosperity. It's also an important occasion to reflect on who is and who is not reaping the benefits that an engineering career offers and what this means for our economic future. Change the Equation, as you probably know, has just done a new analysis of data from the U.S. Department of Education, and it shows that we have ample cause for alarm. Not only are American students of color still significantly underrepresented in engineering degrees, African Americans in particular have been losing ground. And there's evidence that students of color lack the opportunities or support they need when they're in grades K through 12 to help them actually get on a pathway to engineering. Of course, it's not only minority students who need a clear path to engineering, it's all students, and not only so they can become engineers. Research shows that people with engineering backgrounds become a disproportionate share of our nation's innovators, our nation's workforce, and even corporate CEOs. Indeed, that's a big reason why so many employers, even outside of engineering fields, compete for engineers. What's required going forward is a combination of high academic standards, better support, and better opportunities for students to gain the academic foundation they need to have the widest array of choices when they finish high school. In today's STEM Salon, we'll take a closer look at this data and hear from three esteemed engineers who will offer their perspectives on the challenge and solutions that can change the dynamic for young people. As I promised, before I introduce today's panelists and give you an overview of our new research, I want to publicly thank our co-hosts for this event, the American Society for Engineering Education, the American Society of Civil Engineers, the American Society of Mechanical Engineers, and with us today, we have the president, Medea Cobb, and the past president, Victoria Rockwell. The Society of Women Engineers, Discover E, and its executive director, Leslie Collins, whom I know is here. Oh, there she is. IEEE USA, and if I'm right, it's now just the acronym, right? We no longer say the whole name out. The National Action Council for Minorities in Engineering, the National Center for Technological Literacy at the Museum of Science, Boston. I think that's the list. So I really do heartily thank all of these folks really for what they do every day, and especially in helping us bring this to you today. So let me introduce my esteemed colleagues sitting at the table. First, we have Gayle Gibson, the Director of Engineering at DuPont. You may have heard of that small company. Since joining DuPont in 1983, Gayle has served in many roles, most recently as Chief of Staff to the CEO, Ellen Kullman, and Ellen serves on the Board of Directors of Change the Equation. So I first had the privilege of meeting Gayle in that role. She now leads DuPont's engineering research and technology and the company's field engineering program for early career engineers. On the far end is Yannis Miaoulis, the president and director, Museum of Science, Boston, and it's a comma. It's not of Boston or in Boston. It's
the Museum of Science.
Oh, the museum. The museum. I stand corrected. Yannis has been president and director of the Museum of Science since 2003. He also spearheaded creation of the National Center for Technological Literacy at the museum, which is doing wonderful work that we're sure to hear about. Previously, Yannis was the dean of the School of Engineering, associate provost, interim dean of the university's Graduate School of Arts and Sciences, and professor of mechanical engineering at Tufts University. So if you're keeping track, we have a chemical engineer, mechanical engineer, and that leads me to Robert Curbeam, the vice president of mission assurance at the Raytheon Company. At Raytheon, Robert is responsible for the development and integration of Raytheon's mission assurance roadmap. That's not easy to say. Execution of its quality management system and continuous improvement across the integrated defense systems sector. A graduate of the Navy's Top Gun School, Robert also served on 3, catch this, space shuttle missions and 7 spacewalks during his time as a NASA astronaut. And you can find more information about each of the panelists on your seat. So with that, let me start off by giving you the data. Change the Equation has a whole line of data that we call the vital signs. It is information that's broken down on a state-by-state level when relevant and on a national level when relevant. We update the website regularly. It's very widely cited, both by our CEOs and senior executives in companies, and it's available to anyone. So we urge you to pursue that website and look at it. What we're releasing today is one of our vital signs briefs, which happens to be a picture of some national data. And the big message, but I guess a lot of you know this, engineering jobs pay off. The annual mean wage in engineering is about $79,000, which is more than $33,000 than the annual mean for all occupations. At the same time, the unemployment rates for engineers are just over half the overall unemployment rate. So it's 3.8 unemployment for engineers as compared to 7% overall. Higher starting salaries by bachelor's degrees of the top 10, 4 of the top 5 and 7 of the top 10 are in engineering. So petroleum engineer, for example, averages $96,200. So it does pay off. But knowing that, what we see is that Black and Latino Americans have grown as a share of the college-age population. That's the top number. 33% of those who are in that college-age cohort are African American or Latino. But in fact, only 16% of those students are getting engineering degrees and certificates. So this is not only a 4-year degree, but also an associate's degree. So they are not representing their share of the population. Keep that in mind as we keep going. Bachelor's degrees in engineering open more doors. So the projection is by 2022, 9 out of 10 new engineering jobs will require a bachelor's degree or more. Engineering jobs that require mostly a bachelor's degree are projected to grow 8.6% between now and 2022. An engineering technology job, which generally requires less than a bachelor's, is projected to grow by just 2.1%. So it's not only a pay issue, it's an opportunity to find a job issue. The mean annual salary for engineering jobs that require mostly bachelor's and above is $90,000 for sub-baccalaureate, $54,000. And yet, who earns bachelor's degrees? Well, what you can see is that African Americans and Hispanic students are getting credentials with the least growth opportunity. They get mostly sub-baccalaureate degrees, 58%, whereas white students get mostly bachelor's plus degrees. Let me be clear, there's nothing wrong with a job that leads to a mean salary of $54,000. There's nothing wrong with being the first in your family to earn a post-secondary degree. But it should be a student's passion and their drive, not their race, that determine which path they will follow. So I want to unpack this data a little bit more for you. The Latinos have actually made rather large gains in the past decade, though they would still have to triple the number of bachelor's and higher degrees they earn to be represented according to their part of the population. So the news is good, but not good enough for Latinos. African Americans, in contrast, have actually lost ground. While they too are earning moderately higher number of bachelor's and higher degrees than they did 10 years ago, other groups are growing more quickly on the measure. So they're almost staying in place in relationship to others. Why is this? That's the fair question. And what we wanted to look at was to begin to ask ourselves, what are some of the experiences that students may be having long before they make the decision to go into engineering at the post-secondary level? The first thing that we see is this data, which tells you how many 8th grade students have teachers who say they lack the resources that they need to teach science. And in this case, fully half of African American 8th graders and nearly half of Latino 8th graders have teachers who say they do not have all or most of the resources that they need to teach science. It's pretty hard to run a science lab without the materials that you need. The picture is somewhat better in mathematics. 27% of Hispanic and 35% of African American 8th graders have math teachers who report lacking resources. But in contrast, it's 25% of white 8th graders. So the math picture is a little bit better. We also wanted to look beyond middle school, beyond 8th grade, at high school, and that is how many students are in schools that do not offer what we often see as springboard courses to go into School of Engineering. And what you see here is both data from calculus and physics in 2010. Latino and especially Black students are most likely to attend schools that do not regularly offer calculus or physics. Do not regularly offer these courses. Yes, they can go on to post-secondary education and get these credentials, but it's still telling that they're not exposed to them in the same numbers that other students may be. This one, to me, is the most depressing slide in the whole deck. Only 3 in 10 African American and Latino students who are likely to succeed in AP Math actually take the course. So there are all kinds of indicators about math performance and the likelihood that they'll succeed in AP. Only 3 in 10 are actually take the course. And this is the part that's depressing to me. 3 of those say they lack access, which we saw a moment ago, and the others lack the confidence. Too many students are in schools that do not give them access to advanced courses, and too many very capable students are internalizing the message that they are not college material. So what can we do about it? Well, one of the important things is to stay the course on high standards, to make sure that all states and all districts and all schools and all principals and all teachers are maintaining high expectations for every student. We want to ensure that graduation requirements are meaningful and appropriately pitched that we are saying that they need math every year they're in high school. They need science every year they're in high school. We'd like to see more requirements about engineering and technology as well. And we also want to ensure that we've improved the access to math and science education for youngsters in the K-12 grades. Here's information on vital signs and the person that you might reach out to, who you might find later. Klaus, wave your hand so they'll be able to find you. He's our data guru, and we have him to thank for this wonderful data crunch that you see here right now. And because it is 2014, let me put that up on as well. And with that information, let's turn now to our panel. We're going to leave plenty of time for Q&A, and we appreciate if you could hold your questions unless you have such a burning question you can't possibly deal with it. So we've been talking about what we see in terms of degrees, but there is something after the degree, whatever level it is, and that's often a job. One's parents are usually very happy when employment follows. So I'm wondering if you all can tell me from your perspective, how real is the engineering shortage? And what are the implications for your particular company or your organization? Gayle, you want to take it first?
Sure. I think from an overall perspective, what we're finding in DuPont is there is a shortage. And I was part of an interaction at the National Academy of Engineering in November with probably 20 multinational companies. And it really struck me as they went around the room, half of them said there was no shortage. They could find the talent they needed. And as it went around the room and came to me, I decided I'm going to speak up and say, yes, we're finding there is a shortage. And I thought, okay, is this going to really disadvantage our company? Are we the only ones? And then the whole half of my side of the room said the same thing. And as we talked about it, it was really interesting to hear them talk about hiring engineers from China, hiring engineers from other countries, which is a great thing for multinational companies. But for the U.S. competitiveness, are we demanding enough of our own pipelines to develop engineers? So in our company, we find shortages, and it's really more around either deep expertise. My role now, I'm hiring engineers with a lot of deep expertise. So the specialty areas, it's taking a long time to find the right kind of capabilities. It's not always PhD or MS, but often it can be. And I think the other is looking for kind of breadth in the students coming out of school. It's ability to solve problems in teams, which a lot of universities are teaching that way now, but it's more roundedness, good communication skills. So we find the candidates that are more attractive are ones that already kind of are adept at that. And I think we see sometimes their internships or co-ops help them a lot to develop some of those skills. So I think overall, I can understand that some would say there's not a shortage, but our experience is that we do find that these days in certain areas.
I would say from our company's perspective, there definitely is a shortage. And there's a shortage for a lot of reasons. Probably the primary driver for us is we don't have the option to take engineers who aren't U.S. citizens. And so we don't have a worldwide a base of which to pick our employees. We have to have U.S. citizens, and generally speaking, they have to be able to get a clearance. And that's very, very difficult in the post 9/11 world that we live in. So it is very, very important that we home grow a lot of the engineers. And for our future as a company, we understand that these kids that are in elementary school now, those are our future employees. And we have to have a certain percentage of them trained in the hard sciences, engineering, mathematics, to do the kinds of jobs that we think we're going to have in 20, 30, 40 years. So for us, there definitely is a shortage. It's very important that we have that education capability here in the United States, and that we grow engineers that are U.S. citizens, because in a lot of the jobs I have, in most of the jobs I have, I can't hire anything but.
And I would like to, to point out a dangerous trend. Don't be confused by my Boston accent. Actually, I came from from Greece many years ago to study engineering. And one of the things that surprised me the most was how little people in the US understood of what engineering is and what engineers do. Because people that drive trains are called engineers in the US, janitors are called engineers, and engineers are called engineers. 72% of US engineers have had a relative that's an engineer, because that's basically the only way you can find out about engineering, because most career guidance counselors in schools are clueless about engineering. So unless you have a relative, chances are you're not even going to consider engineering. And here's the other place actually that kids find out about careers is television. But who are the heroes in television? There are doctors, lawyers, and forensic scientists. Because kids think that, you know, if you become a forensic scientist, you can wear a micro mini skirt and a tank top and meet cool guys, you know, in a morgue. But in any case, the only way we can, you know, here's the dangerous trend. Look at the demographics of engineers. Most of them are white. As the white population is becoming a smaller and smaller part of the pie, and if you take other ethnic groups that are becoming a larger part of the pie, that typically don't encourage kids to go into engineering, they encourage them to go in other fields. Like African Americans, the preferred disciplines that families encourage kids to go to is medicine, education, and law. So as African American piece of the pie is becoming bigger and bigger, if African American students do not consider engineering, overall we're going to run out of engineers. So it's not a diversity only issue, it's a numbers issue. So the only way this can be solved is if we introduce engineering as a regular discipline in school starting in kindergarten. So kids of all ages find out what engineering is, regardless of the race, regardless of where they came from, regardless if a relative is on. And that's what we have been focusing, introducing engineering as a regular discipline, not just as an after-school program.
So that leads wonderfully to the next question, and that is particularly to our two corporate representatives. So you have a shortage and you have a need. What are some of the things that you're trying to do to address that shortage? And what are the lessons that you take away from it? And what are the challenges that you find?
Well, I think overall we're trying to really overhaul the whole way we go about recruiting. Whether it's encouraging employees to attract someone to the company. So who is it you know, who is it you're in touch with in universities? Our CEO, as many of you know, was part of the Jobs Council and really demanded of us to increase the number of internships in engineering. And people would come to me, Gayle, can we count this one? They're a chemist. I'm like, no, engineers. And, you know, she's going to find the data, so make sure it's right. But I think that's been an enormous benefit as we look back 3-4 years later, because now we're finding that we're converting more of those interns into hires. They've seen our company, we've seen them, we like how they perform, we offer them jobs, and the acceptance rates are going up. So that's been an enormous benefit, hopefully a win-win all around. From the aspect of diversity, I think we're not making the progress that I'd like to see, and now that I'm in charge of engineering hiring, I think we can do even more about it. But we really have to relook at our hiring practices. It's a new world, the way we hire, but also where we're going. And develop relationships earlier on campuses and with various organizations that have students in areas that are interesting. And I think that's an enormously important area and one we're going to have to do a lot more of.
I think there's a lot of things that Raytheon is doing to help us here, but we found that the earlier you catch kids and get them interested, you know, set the hook early, the more likely they are to enjoy it and understand the opportunities that are there. We have programs that we have at the elementary school level, the middle school level, the high school level, and then of course we have internships for college students. And our goal, just like DuPont, Raytheon is trying to convert every one of those interns to full-time employees once they graduate from college. Because that we know, once again, we set the hook early and then we've got them because we need them. So we do programs such as Engineering's Elementary to get younger kids interested in it. Math moves you at the middle school level so that people understand that math all of life is about math. It can all be explained through math. At the high school level, we do everything from programs like that to actually, we have mentorship programs and tutoring programs for local high schools at most of our sites. So we have what we call in Tewksbury, Stand and Deliver, where we actually tutor kids that are having trouble in math and science so that they can hear that concept explained one different way, and maybe that's the way that they understand it. And we can help them and make them realize that this is an option for you. And oh, by the way, it's pretty darn interesting, the kinds of things that we do. So those are just some of the things that Raytheon does, and it's to the tune of hundreds of millions of dollars a year.
So do you see a light at the end of the tunnel, or you think this is going to be an ongoing challenge?
Me personally, I think we have a great opportunity. I can't tell the future, obviously, but I think we're better off now than we were. And I don't think that our company is the only one that's trying really, really hard to understand, one, why some of the kids in the United States shy away from engineering, but also we're trying to teach them, like I said, that the things we do are extremely interesting. And once they understand what we do and how we do it, and see some of the videos that we have, obviously, of our products out there doing what they do best, they get interested and they go, yeah, I think I'd like to be an engineer. And then it's a question of what kind of engineer are they going to be, and they start understanding the different kinds. And some of them are going to be chemies, and they'll end up going to DuPont, but that's okay too. What we have to do is we have to have a strong base of kids who are both interested and understand that it's an option, and it's a good option. It's a very good option. I mean, it's paid huge dividends for me personally, and for many of the people in this room and around the country. So as long as we can explain that to them early, they understand it and see it as an option, then they'll start to pursue it in larger numbers. So I'm very optimistic.
I think there's a lot more cooperation amongst various groups as well. I think as there's more and more research that shows where some of the challenges are, and that's very, very helpful. There is more cooperation in trying to talk about engineering in a way that attracts people, but there's an imperative as well, whether you call it grand challenges or a planet with 9 to 10 billion people in not too far away, and how are we going to create things to help us all live in the world that doesn't destroy the world? And to do that, we know it all takes engineers. So there's a reason Raytheon and DuPont have to cooperate. We might compete occasionally for the same person.
Yeah, sometimes.
But we also, I think, are joined, and our CEOs are very joined in. It is an imperative, and I think that's encouraging, as well as professional societies. There seems to be more dialogue and more awareness that it's not about what I've got versus what you've got. It's about a cooperation there.
And at the museum, we have the National Center for Technological Literacy, which is pretty much an umbrella organization within the museum that does three things. First, we advocate for the introduction of engineering in schools, and we, both at the state level and at the federal level, we support the new engineering, Educating Tomorrow's Engineers Act that was introduced by Representatives Tonko, Kennedy, and Senator Gillibrand. And we can tell you later more about it because we're looking for more sponsors on the Hill. The second thing we do is curriculum development. We have the biggest curriculum development effort for engineering for children in the world. Our materials are being used by 5 million children, and the numbers double every year. And also we have professional development programs for teachers to bring them up to speed to be able to teach engineering. It's a struggle because the curriculum we have today in schools, the science curriculum, was basically decided in 1893. And the reason they left engineering out, the committee of 10 that decided the curriculum, is in 1893, most engineering was farming engineering and kids were learning it at home. But as the curriculum, as the technology took off, the curriculum was never reconsidered. And now have reached a ridiculous point to have kids spend endless time learning how many legs a grasshopper has or drawing leaves between contact paper and have no clue how a car works or how a building stands, and we think it's okay because we don't know how that works either.
Well, let me get personal for a moment. You've stayed at the professional level. How did you figure out you wanted to be an engineer? What is it that led you to that decision? Let's start with Yannis first.
Well, I wasn't born an engineer. Actually, I was a boarding student. My parents were divorced, so my dad thought it was better if I'm a boarding student in Greece. But in ninth grade, I had the option to switch to day student. I went to an all-boys school. So of course I wanted to switch to day student. My dad wouldn't let me, and finally, after a lot of lobbying with his friends, we convinced him and he let me become a day student. So I became a day student grade 9, and I discovered girls. And I flunked 4 courses the first semester. I flunked math, physics, ancient Greek, and English. And of course there was panic because he would send me right back to boarding school. So I had to intercept the report card, which was gonna go to his office. So I went and begged his assistant to hide the card. And we made a deal. She said, I will hide the card and for a semester. If you don't get 4 A's the following semester, then not only I'll show him the card, but I'll tell him that you blackmailed me and you wouldn't let me show the card. So I had no option than getting an A in physics, which I ended up doing. And in the process, I realized that this is cool stuff. But what I thought I would enjoy more is applying physics, and I started getting involved with projects, and that's how I got into engineering, actually. So.
I was pretty fortunate. My mother was a chemistry teacher up in Baltimore. So growing up, I always had larger and larger chemistry sets. And in the late 60s, I guess it was about 8 or 9, I discovered rocketry. And I used to read all these articles about Wernher von Braun and his team down in Huntsville and how they were designing a bigger and bigger rocket. They were designing one that was going to take people to the moon. And I go, gosh, that's really cool. And I said, I want to be on his team that designs a rocket that goes to Mars. And then when they finally made it to the moon and then they stopped, I'm like, oh my gosh, I might be, too young. I may not get there in time to help them design that rocket. And, but it was a driving force for me because I wanted to design rockets. That's what I wanted to do. And then I found out, there are these things called airplanes. Well, they design more different kinds of airplanes each year. It was back when they were designing the teen series of fighters. I go, maybe I could do that. And so I said, okay, airplanes or rockets, I'm cool with either one of those, I go, I can do that because I'm not going to be able to get, down to his team in time to help him design this Mars rocket. So I'm going to do airplanes. And so I stuck to it, and I was fortunate enough to get to go to the Naval Academy, major in aerospace engineering, and the rest is history. I mean, I was just inspired by things that I saw people doing that I wanted to do. I wanted to be a designer. Now, having said that, have I designed an airplane or rocket in my life? No. But the lesson learned is, like my mom always taught me, education is never time wasted. And although I didn't open that door and go and design airplanes and rockets, I got to ride them, which was pretty darn cool too. So I mean, although we don't always realize our dreams, sometimes our dreams change and our goals change. And if you have a background like I was fortunate enough to get in education and engineering, the doors you can open are many. And I just happened to open some different ones when I got older.
I've reflected a lot on this question, actually, and I was talking to my brothers over the phone the other night about it. I think back to my earliest memory about my father, and I recall being able to identify a distillation column by the time I was 5 years old. Now, I had no idea what it did, but I knew what it looked like from afar because we'd be driving around. At the time, Texas City, Texas is where we lived, and we'd be driving and Dad would point to this tall steel piece of equipment, kind of looked like a paper clip at the top, and he said, I built that. That's a distillation column. And he'd talk about, well, there's a pump and all that, whatever you could identify from afar. And at the time, I was like, so what? What are we going to do next? When do we go for ice cream? But when I think about the accumulation of those moments, he traveled around the world building polyethylene plants. And he'd come back and usually bring my brothers, some toy or toy train and cool stuff. And he'd bring me a doll. And after about 2 years of that, he realized I like the toy trains better than the doll. But he would talk about what he did on those trips with an enormous amount of pride. And I think I saw that, as much as I missed him not being at home at the time, it was the pride that really attracted me. And I was telling my brother sort of later in life, why did trying to reflect why I became an engineer. And some would say, oh, it's because your parents expected it. No, I really don't think so. I did ask myself that in my 20s. Am I doing this because, but my parents never said you should be an engineer. What they did do as a girl, they never told me no. They never told me you shouldn't go into engineering, do nursing instead. My mother was a nurse, which I think was very helpful. I also credit my brothers with seasoning me for sort of a man's world, because I grew up with 3 brothers and they really taught me survival skills. But I think the pride that he showed, and later in life, it's really the problem solving that is ultimately what it's about. I've asked myself what do I want to do in my career, and it's really that problem solving that is the cool factor. It absolutely is.
So if you remember some of your classmates in engineering school who decided not to stay in engineering, do you have any insights or memories of what made people choose different paths?
I can start. So my roommates in college, we were all women, and all 4 of us at the time were engineering students as freshmen. And I was the only one that made it through as an engineer. One became a journalist, and 2 became accountants. And it was interesting to watch that journey. And one of the women that turned into an accountant, I think she got a lot of pressure from her father to go in engineering because she was good at math and science. But through those college years, really freshman, sophomore year, she kind of discovered it really wasn't her passion. But the struggle with, well, how do I tell mom and dad? And I think, that was an important kind of thing to watch, to really open the avenues to what is your passion. And if you can have the fortune of having role models in engineering and realizing what that is and finding it, that's a great job. But if it's not, don't.
I think it was 2 things. One was, like you said, the passion. There are some people who are more passionate about it than others. I think I was a little more passionate about being an engineer than some of my classmates. But also, I'm going to say it, it's hard. It's not easy, all right? You have to pay your dues. And there are people who just don't want to do that. They don't want to pay their dues to get that payoff. But I kept looking at it because, and especially at the Naval Academy, it's different because no matter what major you have, you're going to go out, you're going to be in the military. And all of those jobs that are in the military are available to you in any major. It's not until the next tour that things start changing. So I got into test pilot school because I had an engineering background and because I did well. I got into grad school as an aerospace engineering major because I was an aerospace engineering undergraduate. I got into NASA because I had 3 engineering degrees. So although the immediate benefit is not always seen by people as they're paying those dues, it's down the line. You have to explain, I think, if some of my friends had known some of the benefits that come later in life from being an engineering major, maybe they would have stuck it out a little bit. But I think a lot of people, say, gosh, this is really hard, and you're 19, you're 20 years old, while some other people are going out over the weekend, Saturday afternoons, and we didn't have much time to go out when we were at Navy. You're maybe in there working on that lab, and they don't want to do it because they're in some way short-sighted. They don't realize that paying these few dues those first 4 years after you get out of high school pays huge dividends down the line. You get to work with stuff that's much more interesting. And oh, by the way, all the tests then are open book. So it's a lot easier once you get out. Once you've demonstrated to people like Gayle and people in industry that you know how to do it, you've taken all the tests, now you get to just practice. And that's when it gets very interesting.
When I first became Dean of the School of Engineering at Tufts, I got the retention records from the registrars, and I realized we're losing 25% of the first-year students to liberal arts, because at Tufts you can transfer easily. So I called immediately my predecessor, previous dean. I said, Fred, we're losing a quarter of the kids. He said, what's your problem? The average engineering school loses half of its kids. I said, what do you mean? We're not going to do anything because the others lose more. So for the first time ever, believe it or not, we asked the students why you are transferring out. So I had the pizza, and I invited the kids, and And also, I looked at their scores. The average rank order of of high school graduation of the students that were transferring out was top 5%. Their math SAT average was 740, okay? And they had a B plus grade point average when they were transferring out. So obviously they were good students. So with the pizza party, I asked them why, and they said, we don't find engineering interesting. What I found interesting is that I hadn't taken any engineering at the time they were transferring out. Because what do freshman engineers take? Math and science, okay? So, and what we did is we introduced engineering courses, but playful engineering courses out of our hobbies and personal interests freshman year. And within 1 year, Tufts became and still is the only engineering school in the country that more students transfer from liberal arts into engineering, because they can also take these courses, than the other way around. And the best retention was for women and minority students. I have no idea why, but I took full credit of it when it happened.
So we know that you all have very distinguished careers. I'm wondering how your engineering education as students has helped you in other areas as well. Robert, you want to go first?
I think the big thing is, and to Gayle's point, it teaches problem solving. When you're an engineering student, I should say, there is a method that you go through to solve every problem. And it's very disciplined, it's laid out for you, it's very precise. And so when you go and see other problems at work, in your life and all, you kind of attack it the same way. And generally speaking, it still works. The method still works. You sit there and you go, okay, what's the real problem? You know, that's always the first thing, because we don't want to get a solution before we know what the problem is. So what's the real problem? What am I trying to affect? And now how do I affect it? Okay, how does this affect other things? Are all those acceptable? Did I affect what I wanted to? Is the outcome good across the board? Okay, let's go do it. And it's very, very measured, it's very precise, it's always the same. And I find that now that I'm on the business side of defense, the same method works there too. We were just talking over lunch, we were talking about finance. And that's a struggle for me, because I did 23 years in the U.S. government. You know, the whole profit and loss thing is kind of foreign to us on the government side. But once you get in the industry, it becomes very, very important. But I've found in taking these finance courses, that same disciplined approach to looking at problems, figuring out what the real problem is, figuring out what I'm trying to affect, et cetera, still works. And it's wonderful. Because now, you know, I don't have to necessarily learn something new. I got to learn the vocabulary. I got to learn, you know, what, you know, cash is and profit and, you know, revenue, sales, things like that. I got to learn the vocabulary, but I can use the same structured problem-solving techniques that made me successful as an engineer.
Yeah?
Yeah, I think kind of a twist on that. I think about driving change. So I've had a number of roles probably the last 10 years regarding driving different types of change, whether it's business process or different types of teams. And one of the experiences I had was leading one of the employee affinity networks in the company around gays and lesbians. And this was about 10, 15 years ago, which was a very new topic at that point. And I think what my engineering skills taught me is, you know, try to be a little bit dispassionate. And when you're dealing with people, persevere, but also listen. So what's the data? So people will express opinions, they'll express why they don't want to change, whether it's, you know, a new benefit or we're asking them to, you know, adopt something in some new different way, adopt a new procedure. And I think if you listen to the layers of resistance and try to work with them to better identify what it is, and that in a way is a problem-solving skill, but it's a power of observation to try to isolate the problem. A lot of times I find, as I've gotten higher in the company, the problems aren't defined for you, right? They're not written in a textbook. It's very nebulous, right? One of the hardest things to do is define what the problem is. Then the engineers can get going. So I think it is that power of observation, be a little bit dispassionate about what is the issue. And don't come with that solution, and be open to okay, maybe this plan A didn't work. It's okay. Try plan B, try plan C. So that perseverance as well.
And just to add one more thing, I approach pretty much everything as a project. So even in my personal life, it's a project. Sometimes I follow too close the engineering design process in this case, and I get in trouble because, you know, if you follow only logic, you know, then you can run into trouble. But the engineering design process, I think you can apply to pretty much anything, and it keeps you focused and more results oriented.
So let's turn really to K-12 for a moment, because it's K-12 where all the future engineers who will one day be sitting at a table in this building are now being nurtured. And from your perspective, what are the main challenges to creating a pathway for students of color in K-12 to get them to engineering careers? We've touched on pieces of it, but I'm wondering if we can pull it together. I'm going to turn to Gayle first.
Well, I think you've already touched on some in your introduction, Linda, which was very important. You know, the data does speak a lot, and it helps us with the dialogue. I think at DuPont, what we're trying to do as we go into school are two things. One is really work with the teachers. As much as we love working with the individual students, we feel that we can get more impact with teachers on better equipping them, supporting them, whether it's teachers for science, math, or even ag sciences. We have a very large agricultural business. I think the other, as we support our employees going out and doing outreach, is teaching them how to talk about engineering. You know, we have a lot of people with 30 years in the company like me, or even 40 years in the company. They want to go out there and talk to K through, you know, middle school students. But we got to help them understand how you want to talk about engineering as a field. Because, you know, that's the day we all want to wear that badge of honor. I made it through, right? Calculus. I made it through AP this. I got my BS engineer. I got my whatever. But that doesn't attract kids today. Don't tell them math and science is hard, right? They want to hear about, especially girls and certain types of minorities, want to hear about we're doing good things in the world. We're solving problems. You're shaping the future. So really talk about the engineering in a different way. And when they do that, and you gotta get the sparkle in the eyes, it's the sparkle in the eyes that the kids really respond to.
I agree, and I think it all comes down to, number one, interest. Make it interesting to them. You know, it's very, the more boring the subject, the more difficult it is to attract people to study it. And I think we have an opportunity and actually an obligation to get them interested in this, because the future of our country depends on it. We have to make sure that they understand that this is really cool stuff that we do. It really is. Like I said, I'm laughing because I think about some of the things that Raytheon's done in silicon and gallium nitride chips and things like that. And I was like, oh wow, you know, not only is this going to benefit what we do now, but at some point it's going to trickle down, and you're going to see that kind of technology in your cell phones too. Because, you know, semiconductor technology is slowly but surely becoming more driven by the commercial market than it is by our defense industry. So these are all extremely cool things we do. And then after we generate the interest, truly make it known to them that this is an option they can pursue. Not only is it interesting, but it's something that you can do if you want to. And to the point of some of the numbers that Dr. Rosen showed, be successful at it. Be very successful at it. So I think it starts with interest, then you help them realize that they can do it, and then you just watch them blossom, watch them be successful.
We should have a PR campaign about engineering, and engineers are not very good marketeers in general. Take NASA, and I served on the NASA Advisory Committee, and it drove me crazy. NASA is the preeminent engineering entity in the world, okay? They hire 15 engineers for one scientist. When they made the rover go to Mars, the NASA press release called it a science miracle. When the rover failed, they call it an engineering error. So if you have NASA talk about engineering like that, you know, then so that PR is one area. Unless we introduce engineering in the schools in an exciting way, so from a younger age, kids see what it is, and they see them identify themselves as one of these future engineers, it's just impossible to get it done. That's why we're focusing all our effort to do engineering. And unfortunately, a lot of the effort goes to math and science, which is good, but it doesn't get to engineering because the kids do not make the connection between math, science, and engineering as a career, especially kids that don't have this push from their families.
I was telling the story earlier. So my background is mathematics, and when I was a high school teacher, just in Arlington, we got a letter from the Army Corps of Engineers saying that a number of the engineers, the budget was being shrunk. We've heard that before, but this was a long time ago. And a number of engineers in the Army Corps were willing to come to high schools and talk. So another colleague of mine, and I thought, yeah, this is a good thing. We had back-to-back senior classes, so we invited someone to come, and a gentleman came who was absolutely mesmerizing. He did an incredible job bringing engineering to life, all the enthusiasm that we've heard today, but talking about particular projects he worked on and others. It was really incredible. So my colleague, also female, after we had thanked him and had left, she turned to me and she said, "So Linda, did you ever think of going into engineering?" And I said, "Never." And I said, "So Gayle, did you ever think?" "Never." And it was weird enough that we went into mathematics at that time. Let me be perfectly candid, because we were sort of one in the class. But this friend of mine found me some years later and said, "Guess what? I'm a civil engineer." And she had been so inspired by that whole experience that she went back, which I thought was amazing. So it seems as if we need someone to turn on that light, just flip the switch, whether it's a teacher or an out-of-school learning opportunity at the museum, whether it's a parent or any adult who's coming in contact, is so important to turn on that switch. And I don't know if it's just the interest in girls, Yannis, but certainly to understand that we need some nose to the grindstone, but we need nose to the grindstone to succeed at anything, whatever it may be. So writing poetry, which I don't do at all, I imagine is also very difficult. It's just a different kind of difficult. So with that, I want to turn to the audience and see what questions you might have. I think that anything's fair game, right? You'll punt it to me if it's not.
Right.
I'd like you to speak up, speak up, speak up, and I'm going to repeat the question to make sure that it's captured on the videotape. Yes, sir.
I actually have a two-part question, and you've been talking about making engineering interesting, and one thing I noticed on the PowerPoint is a lot about financial incentives, which I think are maybe very practical, but that's not the passionate side that brings like very passionate engineers into the field. So how do you increase I don't know, that side of the PR campaign about going to Mars? And then I would also like.
Well, let me do that question first, because I might not remember when I want to repeat it. So let's see if I'm about to get it right. We have a lot of data that deals with the numbers, the number crunching, finances, and income level, and graduate and degrees. But the question is, how are we going to get kids interested and inspired and understand the richness of engineering? So can I turn to my panel?
Do you want to start?
One thing that most people don't realize is that almost everything is touched by an engineer. And imagine this meeting after you take out all the things that have been human-made, engineered. What would not be here? There would be some of us standing naked on dirt. And when I say some of us, because without pharmaceuticals and water purification systems, life expectancy is 27. Okay? And if we can make that point so the kids understand that everything around them, the fun stuff, the serious stuff, not only the iPhones, but the toothbrushes and the paper clips and their clothes were touched by an engineer. That's a wow moment that most people miss. Especially girls. If you look at the areas that girls get attracted are the ones that have a significant impact to society, even the science areas. Half of the medical school students are women. 85% of the veterinarians are women, okay? Life sciences, full of women, okay? because these are the areas where you can make a difference to the world, where engineers make a lot of difference, because everything has been touched by an engineer. And I think that could carry a lot of weight in encouraging kids going there if it's done the right, positive.
I think it is making it interesting, but it's also about seeing yourself there. So whether that's a role model of some sort, and I think trying to be out there a little more with role models. I think sometimes across engineering we're like, well, we don't have enough CEO role models that are really to be spokesperson. Who's our #1 engineer? Well, we have lots of them, and maybe that's part of the messaging challenge. So I think it comes with what Yannis says, but also we got to find a way to show more people like the ones that we're trying to become new engineers.
I think also, for me, when I talk to kids, I think it's important, especially like I said with kids, to go from the big picture to the small. Because if I tell them as an engineer what I'm doing on a day-to-day basis, probably not going to hold their attention for very long. When I tell them, well, I'm worried about galvanic corrosion between, this surface and that surface, and if we take the zinc out of here, maybe that won't happen. That's not going to hold their interest very long. But when I first say, hey, we got this rocket, this thing flies at 2 times the speed of sound and can go downrange and fly for 100 miles and can hit a quarter, a target the size of a quarter from that range. Now I might have their interest a little bit. And when they see it, and I show them a video of it, or I take them to see a test run, now I definitely have your interest. Now, when I start talking about that galvanic corrosion, which would stop this from working, it becomes relevant and interesting. But I think the important thing in making anything interesting is starting with the big picture. When you sit there and you think back to when we were all in elementary school, we were learning addition and subtraction tables. I could not think of anything that was more boring to me when I was in elementary school, especially in 1st and 2nd grade, than remembering those tables and taking those timed tests. But when I see what that became, a person who can now do differential equations and calculus and help design everything from cars to airplanes to rockets, now I go, gosh, that was really important. And it makes sense why they taught that to me. I just wish they had told me that before I started, that this is what it leads to. So I think that to make it interesting, you have to start with the big picture. We've all been bored senseless in classes, learning some little piece of the picture, a little piece of the puzzle without knowing what the big picture is. But if you start with the big picture and come down to that little piece of the puzzle that fits in it, I think that's when it becomes interesting to people. At least that's when it becomes interesting to me.
And you had a second question.
And then with that, improvement, how are your respective companies and organizations improving the world and improving, the future?
So let me just again repeat for the video. How are your companies improving the world, improving the future?
One of the things DuPont's worked a lot on the last couple of years is really helping people understand our company better. So we have a lot of business associated with food security. It's going to be hard to feed 9-10 billion people 20-30 years from now. And how do you do it without destroying more rainforests? So with the same arable land that we have today, how do you feed that many more people? There's a lot of science, a lot of engineering involved in that. More energy, so less fossil fuels, more sustainable sources of energy, and even for fossil fuels, how do you make that more productive to use, whether it's lower air emissions or other things. And then protecting life and the environment. We do a lot of things around that. People know Kevlar pretty well, Kevlar vests and Nomex firefighter gear that protect a lot of individuals. So it is making it interesting when we show people that.
I think from our company, being a defense company, we're a little bit different. And being in integrated defense systems, we're just that. We protect things, be them from incoming artillery rounds, airplanes coming in to do you harm, ballistic missiles coming in to do you harm. We protect things, and that's how we make the world better. Our goal is to make sure that if your brother, your sister, your mother, your brother using one of our systems, they come home. That's what it's about, and that's what we talk about in mission assurance every single day.
And we're in the inspiration and education business. In the museum, we have unique opportunities to inspire kids and adults to learn more about how the world around them works, both from the science and the engineering point of view. And also, we are truly the primary drivers of the E in STEM in the United States. We have raised and spent millions and millions of dollars on advocating, developing curricula, and we're going to make it happen. The new science standards, the next generation science standards, are full with engineering, and we're one of the primary drivers that made that happen. And that will motivate state by state to have engineering as part of the formal curriculum in schools, which will affect millions of children.
And I would add that Change the Equation member companies are not only doing good for the future of the world, but they are doing good right now through their corporate social responsibility efforts. And they expend significant dollars to support lots of opportunities for kids to have mentors, to be introduced to ideas, to see museum exhibits. Our companies together spend nearly 2/3 of $1 billion a year in philanthropic dollars. And a lot of it, that's in STEM only, just towards STEM in K-12. So they are doing good in another way as well. Other questions?
Yeah, from the data you presented at the beginning, like definitely as a society, you want to have the engineering community being reflective of the whole population, and you want diversity in it as much as the population. From all what was discussed so far, it's a common message. Do we have to cater the message to attract more Hispanics or more African Americans to join engineering?
So let me again repeat, and that is, do we need any special methods or approaches to particularly attract African American and Hispanic students to engineering?
I talked to some of our own employees, Hispanics and African Americans, about, you know, what would it take to change some of this picture. And, you know, the feedback was really interesting from our Hispanic employees, many that came to the United States as a first generation, you know, their parents came. And it was more around role models. And, you know, kind of the ones that have become engineers said, you know, they didn't know about engineering. They really didn't know about it as a field because that wasn't in Columbia or wherever they grew up at the time. It just wasn't something they had been exposed to. So I think for part of the journey that they were on, those specific people I was talking to, it was more about making it more of a role model. For the African Americans, it was, the encouragement they gave me was a lot of what we're already doing. So supporting NACME, supporting NSBE, a lot of the associations, GEM, and getting out there and being more proactive as a company, maybe. I think we're a part of a lot of things, but what Linda kind of taught me in my experience with Change the Equation is, you know, companies have a lot of weight, and sometimes we don't vocalize it enough, and it's really easy to do at times. So, you know, doesn't always have to be the CEO. So a position on Common Core, let's make it very clear. We made it very clear to our own employees, and I think that's starting to make a real difference. And that wasn't hard to do, but we just didn't realize, you know, how much it would help if we did it. So hopefully it's more of things like that.
First of all, I'll say I don't know. I really don't know, because I think the one thing that a lot of the data doesn't show is how much exposure to this information do those groups have. I think that's just as big a question, that, and I'm not saying that all that stuff looks valid, and it's very important data. Now we got to find out the why. We have to find out exactly what you said. Do we need to change the message and how we present it? I don't know. But I can tell you one thing, the first thing I would try to find out is, are they even getting a message right now? They may not be. You know, and maybe that's the problem. Maybe these two groups, Hispanics and African Americans, aren't even getting the message. So that's the first question. Are they getting the message? Get it to them, and then I think we can do some more data reduction and figure out, okay, how should we package it? How do we present it? Does it work the same, you know, with those two groups as it does white Americans? I don't know the answer, but I think the first question is, are they getting the message at all?
So you know he's an engineer just by the way he answered the question.
And the message, as I mentioned before, has to come either from school. So if you have engineering in school, they'll get the message, or it comes from the TV. And as I said before, the only engineer hero in American television is Homer Simpson. You know, so where are they going to get the message if it's not at school? They're just not. And role models are important. I have two daughters, and both of them became engineers, mechanical engineers. And the little one, by the way, they became because I stayed away from it. If I told them to become engineers, there would be two drama majors in the house. But the little one did not consider engineering. When I stepped back, and we encouraged her to go to the open house at Tufts that was for girls only. They had the only girls open house. She said, I don't want to be an engineer, so just go. So she went, and they had 4 young alums of Tufts, one of them holding her baby, very successful engineers, that talked how wonderful it was to become an engineer. The next day, she applied to the School of Engineering. That's all it took, to see somebody that she could associate with, somebody that was attractive, with her family, talking about positively about engineering. So.
Other questions?
Hi, I'm Sandra Johnson-Austin with the National Action Council for Minorities in Engineering. And we're talking a lot about K-12. I just wanted to recognize 2 of our board companies, DuPont and Raytheon. I do have 2 questions a question for both of you. But K-12 is, the message to those individuals is very important. And a lot of programs are out there that have specific messages for, whether they're African American or Latino, but there does need to be a distinct message for those particular groups of students. And for us at NACME, we've launched an Engineering Something Amazing campaign at NACME.org, and many of the students were asking teachers and volunteers and et cetera to actually be a part of that. So that's one of the ways in which NACME is kind of feeding into this message that we're talking about. But specifically to Raytheon and to DuPont, the folks that are on the panel, Robert and Gayle, we have the largest provider of scholarships that go to students that are African American, Native American, and Latino. And the challenge for a lot of them is getting an internship as a part of their experience as a scholar. Now, we do provide that with the companies that serve on our board, but what I want to know from both of you is, what are you looking for when it comes down to hiring that student that has, whether the playing field is level, and what is the one takeaway that you need in terms of looking for that particular stellar student to hire them at your company?
So if I could just repeat, this is particularly for DuPont and Raytheon, and make sure I get this right. What is it that really makes you make that job offer, in particular, assuming that you've got high-performing students?
You know, our criteria began with GPAs, to be honest. And I think one of the things we're looking at is how do we really want to adjust those criteria and better make ourselves available to different audiences. We get a lot from the Northeast, but we have a lot of internships in Gulf Coast plants. So it's not fitting well, I think, the way it works. And I think if we now realize we're going to hire permanently a lot of these interns, then we've got to better focus and get into different schools, different locations to do that.
I think that like everybody, we want to see somebody who has a challenging academic curriculum on their resume and is doing well. I mean, let's face it, we want your best and your brightest. Everybody does. DuPont does, Raytheon does, all the companies do. But I would say if I could give one piece of advice, something that we always look for, we want somebody that starts off younger rather than older. We want that guy, that guy or girl who has just finished their freshman year to come, because we want them to come back every single year. So my advice to them, okay, all of us want people who are doing well in school, but I want you to start early, because my goal is to convert the vast majority of you to full-time employees when it's all done. So I want you to come, you know, before your sophomore year, I want you to come before your junior year, I want you to come before your senior year, so that, you know, when you're a senior and you put in that, you know, that resume, which basically consists of, you know, I've been an intern for 3 years, all at Raytheon, and my GPA is X, hopefully over a 3 or a 3.5 or something like that. That's what I really want, right? I can go, oh, and by the way, she worked as an intern down in operations for 3 summers, and so-and-so knows her, so-and-so knows her. These 5 people know her. She's a great worker. We want her, period. So although the academic side of it is important, as you know, people seeing that you have demonstrated that you can work in that environment and do well in that environment matters too. So that's what I'm looking for. If I can find an intern that's done a couple summers with Raytheon to come onto my team, that's probably my number one.
Yes, ma'am, in the back.
Hi, my name is Beth Walker. I'm with the National Science Foundation. I wanna follow up on some words that you just used, this whole concept of the best and the brightest that we're all looking for. I've been working at an institution of higher education for about 22 years now, and not all the students that come out of engineering are the best and brightest. I mean,
True.
they can't all be
True.
there, because there's gotta be some comparison that says, these are the best, and these are the brightest. So what I see is a lot of students with a huge potential to contribute that are not being selected by companies because they're not the best and the brightest. So I offer that to you, and I'm trying to remember the company. I saw a graph one time. I had a colleague of mine sent me a graph from a defense company that basically charted the high-level executives within the company versus their GPA when they got out of school.
Mhm.
And it was pretty amazing. But yet, we're still, what I'm hearing is we need more engineers, and what I'm hearing is, but they're not gonna find jobs, because they're not the best and the brightest.
So I think the question, and again, let me know if I've gotten it right, is not everyone's graduating at the top of their class, 3.5 and up, and yet they may have a great deal to contribute. So how do you deal with that reality?
Well, we have different opportunities. We do hiring for some of the best and brightest into a rotational program for engineers. So every couple years, we're putting them somewhere else to get an experience. We do hire directly into some of our plant sites. I think the generation coming out of school today feels like it's a little bit more geographically restricted within the U.S. They want to be closer to certain family members, and that is causing us to kind of relook at some of our approaches. There's also sales. So we have some programs in sales. So if certain engineers don't, if you will, make the cut for the best and the brightest in one hiring program, we'll let our group know that's into sales. A lot of what we do is very technical sales. So degrees are very, very helpful. But it may not be that they need quite the high GPA there. And they've been very successful there as well.
Yeah, and we, although that's who, who's probably gonna make the first cut, we hire people with GPAs all over the board. They're all in different positions, they're all helping in different ways. I'm kind of surprised that I've heard it. I've heard engineers say, oh, I can't find a job, fresh outs, and I'm like, are you kidding me? It's very surprising to me, and I'm sure they exist. There's no doubt in my mind, no doubt. But one of the things that you mentioned that I thought was kind of interesting is a lot of them, I think, unnecessarily restrict where they look. And they have good reasons, and I understand that. But I think one of the things that we have to teach younger people now is if you want the best jobs, you got to be willing to move. You've got to be willing to move. And that was one of the things when my boss, who's now soon to be the CEO of Raytheon, told me. He said, okay, you're coming into this job. He said, but stand by. There's no guarantee you're going to be on the East Coast or in New England for the rest of your career. And as a matter of fact, you probably will not. And that's a problem we even have with some people, quite frankly, that are in the company. They want to grow within the company. They want to do better, but they're not willing to leave, where they're living. And unfortunately, in this kind of business, you got to be mobile.
There's another question in the back. I can't see the person. Yeah, I see the hand.
I serve as a senior university with the American Society of Engineers. And I have a question directly to the representatives from DuPont Raytheon, then something that I'd like for you to talk about. What we found is that retention is almost as important as bringing them in the door. And when I'm talking about mid-career and those who are established. So if you all could talk about some of the successes you've had in your retention programs, as I know you have. And then the other question, and this is one that you can bow out of, is the immigration issue, should that be a part of the conversation when we talk about changing the approach?
Okay, so 2 questions. One, how do you deal with retention throughout the course of a career, mid-career, and so forth? And with a get-out-of-jail-free card, what are the overtones of the immigration debate? Robert, you want to start?
I would say, first of all, yes, the retention is a big issue, a very big issue. Because what we find, especially with fresh outs now, this generation, the attention span is not necessarily as long as we're used to. You're not going to see, I mean, one of the things at Raytheon we always celebrate, we have 40 and 50-year employees. Probably not going to happen a whole lot anymore. Probably not going to happen because people change jobs, change companies, change where they live a lot now, a lot more than they used to. So you're spot on. Getting them in the door is half the problem, you know, solved. The other half is keeping them, you know, especially when, as we said, you have a shortage of talent, and if everybody wants these good people, these people prove that they're good in one company, they move to another often. So retention is a huge issue, and you're right, we spend a lot of time talking about it. The immigration problem, you know, the immigration question, I should say, as far as what we do there, oh my gosh, there are so many moving parts there. It really is very, very, it's very, very difficult for us because, like I said, we have so many restrictions on who we can hire and who can get a security clearance and things like that. And it really just depends on how that falls out as far as how it affects us, what Congress and the President decide, and how they not only get the people in this country to stay, but also get them to become U.S. citizens, and what that track looks like as to whether it affects what we do or how we do it.
Yeah, around retention, we've got a new senior VP of HR in probably about 3 years ago, and he's done a wonderful job of helping us look at data at all levels. And, you know, he's pointed out with that data some of our challenges. So I think part of you have to look yourself in the mirror with real data. And that's really helped us get beyond, you know, resting on our laurels, if you will. I think in the areas of diversity, DuPont was very leading edge 20 years ago, 15 years ago. And I think this data is showing us, you know, others are starting to pass us by. So it's a nice wake-up call. Specifically with retention, we're looking at certain mid-career hires right now, a little more on leadership ranks, but I'm seeing in the technical professional ranks, it's really vital as well. Our diversity, we felt, has been pretty good, but not matching the population of the United States in the way that it should. And with the, if you will, baby boomer retirements coming.
She looks at me, did you notice that?
There's an imperative really around understanding the ways we can connect that retention. So we use our Hispanic employee network quite a bit around mentors, and they do a really good job. And they've actually been banging the drum around the data, which is important. Also with our African American employee network, it's a broader network and more dispersed, but mentoring is a key part of what they do. They've also done a good job of connecting higher level sponsors in our African American network, which I think is an important dimension in this. In terms of immigration, you know, we're an innovation company. We need talent of all types, and we do think the United States, we would like to see acceleration of certain types of visas. So we're kind of open to that diversity and richness that the country was founded on, helps our country overall, helps the company.
One fact that we didn't mention in the earlier remarks is the fact that we will, in not too many years, become a minority-majority country. And so Yannis's observation that many of the faces are white in engineering schools, you know, is going to run smack into the demographics. Victoria.
One of the questions I have is sort of pulling on the strings of something someone said earlier. Are we looking at maintaining the status quo as far as the number of engineers, but looking at the diversity and improving the diversity? Or do we need more engineers? And Linda, you know, I'm very passionate about STEM, so I think everybody should have a STEM education. But I'm running up against people who are arguing we have too many. You know, there is not a shortage. So my question is, you know, are we trying to maintain the status quo, but increasing the diversity of engineering? Or do we really need to go out and start looking to get more folks to go into engineering?
So again, to repeat the question, is the issue making the existing workforce size more diverse, or is the issue increasing the number and at the same time having a more diverse workforce? And I'm not sure it's an either or, but let me first try that.
To me, it's both. I mean, there are groups that get very energized about, well, we need better retention of women in engineers. We need better retention. I view it as a good thing. To Robert's point earlier, it's a foundational set of skills that helps in a lot of areas. And it's okay if the mechanical engineer out of Tufts became the CEO of DuPont. I mean, that's okay. She's in a business field now, not an engineering one, but it's really done fantastic things for the company. So I don't view that as a leakage problem. I view that as a success, which implies the number overall needs to be greater. And certainly the diversity within does definitely need to be greater.
I think we need more and we need better. And if we present engineering to all kids, we're going to get both, because engineering is a great career, is a great education and a great career. And I don't think we get necessarily the best and all we can get. Every single company I used to talk to when I was dean, and now that we have a lot of sponsors, everybody needs more candidates for their job because of the quantity and the quality. I haven't heard anybody say we have too many. And my daughter, who graduated 3 years ago, she had 4 offers and they were fighting over her, which means the supply is low.
I think you need both. You need more, definitely, but I think it needs to be more diverse. And the reason I say that is because, you know, when people come from diverse backgrounds, they generally have diverse thoughts. If they have diverse thoughts, you start to think a little bit outside of the box. I'll give you an example. When I was operational in the Navy, you know, our ready room, there were, you know, 30 of us in the ready room, and that's where all the air crew sit. And if you had asked a question of that, you would have gotten 29 of the same exact answer probably, and then 1 different. And the reason is because we all had very, very similar backgrounds. We're all Navy, we're all flying F-14s, we're all sitting in the middle of the Atlantic on a ship at the time, you know. So we generally attract and attack problems the same way. But when you get a group of people who all have different backgrounds and different experiences, generally speaking, what you find is they look at the problem differently. And when they look at the problem differently, you consider more of the risks associated with that problem. And generally speaking, you come up with a more robust and better answer at the end, because it addresses all of the risks, not just the risks of this group of people who all think alike, but the risks that the whole group has come up with based on their experiences and the diversity of those experiences. So I think you need both if you truly want a good engineering, you know, department, unit, country, you know, company. I think you have to have both.
There's another group we haven't really talked about, so I'd like to go there a little bit, is you know, people that run our plant sites, the technicians in our labs. They don't need a 4-year degree. They don't need to be, you know, BS engineers. But more and more, they pretty much need a very good foundational education. And more, I think it's going to be associate's degree, probably not too many years away from it being BS degrees of some sort. You know, running a manufacturing plant in the U.S. today is a world of difference than even 20 years ago. Very, very technical, at least for us. A lot of data used, distributed process control. You have to really understand not only the fundamentals of the control system, but for us, the chemical process, the agricultural process. Precision ag is very, very technical. So I think the world of the future is, maybe it's not the BS engineers alone, but the associates and all, and whatever comes out of high school is going to be really, really important to be science, not afraid of science. Understanding the fundamentals in math and science is going to be really key.
You don't need to raise your hand, but if your staffer's working on Perkins, we hope you're listening to this. Let me just take one moment also to add a change the equation perspective to this. When you look at use a national paintbrush and look at the number of degrees and the number of job openings, it is sometimes difficult to see the shortage. Just when you're looking at that perspective, when you're standing back at 30 feet or however far you have to stand back to look at the U.S. But there are a lot of threads that have come up in this conversation that drill down more on a local level and on a particular employer and the hiring practice. So the first thing is that engineers, among other STEM degrees, are very often diverted into other fields. Wall Street is crazy to hire folks who have engineering degrees or finance degrees. I mean, they do a lot of recruiting at engineering schools, and they are often rather lucrative. And so someone with an engineering degree may in fact be in a very different job than what he or she first imagined. So that's one particular issue. We also heard about the reluctance or the inability of some folks to relocate. So you do have situations where someone who's looking for a job, and everyone has an uncle or a cousin or their next door neighbor's brother or somebody who's been an engineer and who's been looking for a job for 30 years, or how, that's an exaggeration, but looking for a job for a long time. But that ability to relocate and to be where the jobs are is often a challenge, and particularly, as you're saying, more of a challenge for some young people coming through the recession in particular. Change the Equation did a study called STEM Help Wanted, where we used a company called Wanted Analytics that collected all of the job postings that were available, not looking in the newspaper because people don't advertise in the paper anymore, but online, and aggregated all of those STEM jobs and compared it to the unemployment rolls. This is between 2008 and 2011, during some of the worst of the recession, and we needed 3 years to get rich enough data. What we found, again, looking at those who were unemployed, there were 1.9 STEM jobs for every one unemployed STEM professional. That doesn't mean that it's the job down the street, or it doesn't mean that the job down the street is even in your particular area of expertise. And that's part of this dilemma that I think we have in using a national lens for what is really a local problem and a local challenge. I think we have time for one more question. Over here, please.
So I feel that if we're serious about expanding access to STEM and engineering in particular to communities of color, we need to look at the structural barriers, and that's not really something that I've heard a lot about in this discussion. So I'm wondering how your companies, or how the Museum of Science, how Tufts, is trying to address these barriers, and this is things like public education reform, poverty reduction, and affirmative action.
So there are structural barriers to reaching students of color, and the question is, what are our three panelists in their respective careers doing to address public education, issues of poverty?
Well, in DuPont, we've been working with Delaware schools. It's a smaller state, and we're very influential, having been there over 212 years, to really work more on science in school, kind of grades 4 through 11. And I was just looking at some data the other day. I think it was 8 years between 01 and 09. The proficiency improvement in African American and Hispanics, the community there that we're working through is about 45% Hispanic and African American, and around 40% sort of on the poverty line. So I think it hits some of the demographics you're talking about. The proficiency in science improved over that 8-year period about 20% in those communities. So we're kind of showing, that Delaware model that we do with the teachers and bringing science in there, which we're now using engineering as elementary as well in the Delaware schools. It's showing it's working. And I think that's been discussed in some of the forums. I think some of you here today have been a part of DuPont's work there. So it's a smaller example. Delaware has a Race to the Top grant, so we're hoping some of those successes can be shared and leveraged along with many other tools that Change the Equation offers.
I think probably the most important thing we do is we go to them. It used to be you hang out your job rec and you see who comes, see who answers it, right? Instead, I think we have to go to them. One of the things that we're doing in Raytheon, for instance, our Stand and Deliver program is specifically for a high school that is primarily Hispanic in the area. And that's where we go and tutor, because that's where the need is right now. So we go to them instead of waiting for them to come to us saying, oh, we have this need. We do the same thing with Girl Scouts of Massachusetts. We know women are underrepresented in the engineering force, so we go to them. When they have their jamboree, one day a year, it's with Math Moves You, and we sponsor that, and we show them, like I said, just how cool what we do is. So I think that's probably the most important way to go and overcome those structural barriers that you're talking about. They can't always get to you. Sometimes you got to go to them. Sometimes you got to bring them to you, and we do that sometimes by giving them tours and things like that. But just, you know, like I said, hanging your shingle out there and hoping that they come. You know, if you build it, they will come. Doesn't work in this case. You know, you have to go and actively pursue them. And I think that overcomes a lot of those structural barriers you're talking about, and that's what we do.
And let me, since you mentioned both TAFs in the museum, TAFs, I'm on the board of trustees now, so I can speak for TAFs, although I don't work there anymore. TAFs, like most of the elite universities, have very active programs to recruit minority students. This is a true priority for pretty much every school. The problem is they all compete with each other for the same students. So what needs to be done is to increase the pipeline and the number of students that could be successful in schools like that. A lot of these schools have summer programs for minority students that don't have, some of them don't have as good of a preparation as the other students, and to more study skills, and they have been very successful. The retention has been much better. At the museum, as I mentioned, we have the biggest program in the country, in the world, in introducing engineering to all schools, which will then obviously will open opportunities to all children, regardless of their ethnic origin and race. And our curriculum features 20 children from 20 different countries, and they're all from all sort of ethnicities. So kids see somebody that looks like them play a role in engineering, and so the role model, we introduce the role model from a very young age. So kids could see that, yes, I'm this ethnic group, but I can do engineering as well. And it has worked wonderfully. And we have, if you go on our websites, you can see studies we have done of how success we've had in certain areas that the minority population is much higher. And frankly, the curriculum works better in areas that are diverse, because the kids see the point of learning math and science, and they become excited, and they perform better.
Well, with that, I want to please join me in thanking our esteemed panelists. We invite you to stay for reception. We have food and drinks coming in even now. Please take the opportunity to mingle with one another, and I'm sure that our panel will be glad to answer some questions. I didn't ask them in advance, but I'm sure they'll be glad. And we thank you very much for joining us today.